The month of August 2024 is a very important month. The nation of Zimbabwe has seen so many buildings being put up, roads being rehabilitated, and so forth. A very busy month because there's going to be the SADC summit. It is important that we understand the historical background of SADC and where we are today and the significance of hosting it in Zimbabwe. My name is John Masugu and welcome to Economic Forum, a program where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. They can be to do with agriculture, with mining, with human resources, and many aspects of life. We bring them here to Economic Forum in order to fully understand how they affect our economy. And to discuss the SADC summit, which is very dear and very important to us as Zimbabwe, we've invited Richard Runyararo Mahomva, who is the Director of International Communications in the Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services. Richard, welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's very important to understand where SADC has come from. We're starting at the frontline states, and that is during the War of Liberation, and we get liberated. And on the 1st of April 1980, SADC, which was then known as the Southern Africa Development and Coordination Conference, is formed. And then the following year, the offices are set up in Botswana, and Zimbabwe is given the honor of actually appointing the first Secretary General, Simba Makoni. Let's start from there. That significance, Richard, is very, very important to spell out.
The SADC is a product of the ideological merits of Pan-Africanism, which is an idea that is concerned about the global synergy of Africans home and abroad. But most importantly, at the formative stage of Pan-Africanism, you would notice that it is an idea which was anchored on mobilizing the Africans against colonialism, and at the same time institutionalizing that particular initiative which gave birth to the frontline states. And you'd notice that within that ideological context, our independence is tied to the ideological and material benevolence that we received from Tanzania, that we received from Zambia, Mozambique, and all other nations who were actually big brothers of the decolonization project. So fast forward, after the independence was attained, remember when SADC is formed, we still had the last born of our African independence in the form of South Africa, whose freedom was beaconing. So there was need to then institutionalize, create a regional economic coordination community, and SADC became that particular institutional driver. And what was the foundation or the foundational principle? Number one, it was to promote regional integration of these countries in the south which had received their independence through mutual protracted struggles. Number two, these countries had to set the agenda for the peace that they wanted. They had to also set the agenda for the unity that they wanted. And Zimbabwe found itself as the trailblazing figure also in the foundation of SADC. So when Zimbabwe was the SADC summit, Zimbabwe is returning to the institutional ideological values that it invested to this organization that is called SADC. So it's that historically and philosophically significant as Zimbabwe returns to the ideological source.
Very, very important. We mentioned the frontline states and the war was still hot, and then SADC, the Southern Africa Development and Coordinating Conference, which then was abandoned later to form the current SADC that we have. But what is important is that at that time, South Africa, as you mentioned, as well as Namibia, were still to be independent. And it was on the 1st of April 1980 that SADC was formed, before the offices were established in 1981. That significance of saying Zimbabwe is now free, although we're still going to South Africa and Namibia assisting them, but let's go ahead and have something. The significance of that.
Well, it shows that there is a perennial and a pervasive acquired political soul amongst African nations, which is predicated on the continued aspiration for independence. Yes, the era that you are referring to was mostly ideologically fixated, but fast forward within the millennial context, this unity and its political dividends should be translated to economic dividends. This is why even when you look at the theme of the forthcoming SADC, it is pivoted on innovation and industrialization. This is why you also look at even the African Continental Free Trade Area. It is predicated on that notion of transforming political dividends to economic dividends. Therefore, it is also not an accident that in the context of the Second Republic, there is this emphatic predisposition of saying Zimbabwe is open for business. So there is this reality of Africans uniting around creating sustainable economic trajectories, and SADC is reinforcing that.
Tell us about the road to Zimbabwe, why and how we've arrived where we are when we are going to hold the summit on the 17th of August, and a significant date because that's when the former SADC was transformed to the economic SADC.
So I think the first historical symbolism is that by coincidence, and a good coincidence for that matter, is that we are hosting SADC in the month of August, the very same month when we also celebrate our Heroes and Defense Forces Day. So there's that historical connection to say we are reliving the aspirations of those that went ahead of us. And fast forward in terms of the operational imperatives, the roads that are in sync with the diplomatic optics of hosting such an important platform are actually complete, or some reaching stages of completion. The building itself, remember the summit will be hosted at the new parliament. You look at the architecture of the new parliament, it is a competitive architectural outlook as that of the African Union. And this quite shows us the extent to which the Second Republic is slowly breaking the relics of colonialism. So what it means is that Zimbabwe is gravitating to being a citadel of African diplomacy. And for me, that is a milestone of our national foreign policy, courtesy of the Second Republic.
That's Richard Runyararo Mahomva. He's the Director of International Communication in the Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services. We are talking about the SADC Summit, which will be held in Zimbabwe on the 17th of August. And already preparations have been underway for a long time. So as we move forward, we're going to be looking at the economic significance of holding this summit. So join us in the second segment of Economic Forum. The roadmap to the summit, the SADC summit to be held in Zimbabwe, has been punctuated by a number of events, key among them being the Industrialization Week, as it is also part of the theme. Now, Richard, let's look at our road right up to the 17th, beginning with the importance of this Industrialization Week, which sort of started everything.
So the birth of the Industrialization Week, which in Zimbabwe was in its 7th edition, is predicated on SADC's value and understanding of the importance of industrializing, of value addition, and of ensuring that there is free movements of goods and services as guided by the existential statutes of the regional grouping. But most importantly, it's quite symbolic that Zimbabwe was actually hosting this particular platform, because it is a platform that was also opening Zimbabwe to African investment, because many a times when we think of foreign direct investment, we are thinking of it in terms of the traditionally predatory Anglo-American entities. But the fact that we initiated the SADC Industrialization Week, it's an expression of our internal confidence as a region and as Africans to say we are able to innovate, we are able to share the resources that we have for the betterment of our people. And for me, that is very important. It speaks to the pride that we have to our local innovations and how our governments have got a committed energy to actually funding local industries, funding local innovation. And within our context, this resonates with Education 5.0, which actually is emphatic on commercialization, on industrialization. So it buttresses the already existing policy commitments of the government of Zimbabwe, which resonate with the rest of the region.
Yeah. When you look at SADC as a whole, what are we looking at economically? You are coming from another continent or another region, and you are saying if you do business with SADC, Zimbabwe included, you are actually, in a much bigger family. What is it?
Number one, legislatively, there is the ease of doing business. And the availability of the statutory provision by way of the African Continental Free Trade Area, it means that the movements of goods within the region, there is a cost-effective comparative advantage. It also means that the rich geological endowments that the region has, with of course Zimbabwe taking the lead in that respect, it means one is able to have access in that respect. You also look at our flora and fauna, it means that one is able to invest in tourism. So our environmental ecosystem has got these inherent elements that make us a multi-million dollar or multi-billion dollar regional economy, which anyone should be interested in, including the locals and those that find merit in our God-given endowments.
Yes. In addition to that, Richard, you may want to also explain the importance of having these countries in SADC which were colonized by the British as well as by the Portuguese and still have some bilateral relationships with their former colonizers in terms of doing business and so forth. Is that an advantage?
Well, I think Africans, we need to appreciate Africans as global actors with agency, with control to know what brings merit to national interests and or not. So I strongly feel our governments are capable to attract capital from wherever. And this has been clearly asserted even in our local position by His Excellency that Zimbabwe is a friend to all and enemy to none, because capital knows no color. So the issue of color, the issue of looking back at retrogressive notions of the predatory state of nations is something that should be given consideration, but should not have overarching interests to what brings development. But at the same time, we also need to think of our internal capabilities as Africans on what we can do for ourselves before we think of engaging our erstwhile colonial forces.
Mm-hmm. But from your own glimpse of the industrialization week and the preparations, how have been the feedback from the corporates in Zimbabwe to take advantage of this week as well as the summit itself?
So, most of you would recall that in the past decades, we didn't have a very functional industrial economy, but a lot of industries are actually emerging as far as 2017. So this has been an opportunity for them to express the meticulous state with which they are actually existing in the financial ecosystem. And I think it's a good signal because we've got new manufacturers of domestic goods, and it has been an opportunity for them to express the extent to which they can actually export some of their products or widen their export gap.
That's Richard Runyararo Mahomva, who is the Director of International Communications in the Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services. We are discussing the SADC Summit, which will be held in Zimbabwe. And the date is the 17th of August, 2024. But there are a number of events as well as projects that have been taking place prior to that date. So join us in the third and final segment of Economic Forum. We've discussed what can be expected from SADC when looked at a bird's eye view. But right now we want to look specifically at what the countries which were under colonization by the British as well as the Portuguese but have come together in order to consolidate their independence as well as develop their economies. And Richard Runyararo Mahomva, the Director of International Communications in the Ministry of Publicity and Broadcasting Services, is our guest today. Richard, coming to that, let's look at what these countries in SADC can bring. Each one, for sure, has something.
So you gave an anecdote of the fact that these were former colonies of the then empire. They were colonized because they had resources, and these resources are still there. So it means that these countries have got shared assets, they've got shared resources. This is what they are putting together on the table. But when these countries are united and they are not divided, it means that there is collective economic stability for the region. But most importantly, if you are to look at it from a normative point of view, neighbors are given. You don't choose who becomes your neighbor, but neighbors are naturally given. So these countries are also bringing this neighborliness. This is why at some point, most recently, our president and the president of South Africa had to tour the Beitbridge border post, because they understand the significance of the transaction that happen, the transactions that happen if that particular space is opened up and their countries are trading. This is why from time to time our heads of state engage to have bilateral agendas that enforce the notion of unity. So this is what they are plainly bringing, with the same spirit that activated Nkrumah in 1957 to say the independence of Ghana is meaningless until and unless it translates to the total independence of the African continent. So the prosperity of Zimbabwe today is meaningless if it does not translate to the equal prosperity of Zambia, of Mozambique, of South Africa and Botswana. So they are reliving that organic Pan-African affirmation of shared resources, shared aspirations, and of course a shared destiny.
How about taking advantage of these resources? Like, are we really benefiting from the Mozambican ports, the South African ports, the Angolan ports, far as they may be, and so forth, and what others also benefit from Zimbabwe? Is that happening on a practical point of view?
No, it is. In as much as I cannot quantitatively elaborate on that, but it is. And the point I have made is that our economies are interdependent and we are an ecosystem, hence the continued value of our unity.
When everything is said and done, and when we come to the end of the SADC Summit, which will be held on the 17th of August 2024, our President, His Excellency President Emmerson Mnangagwa, will be the chairperson of SADC. Let's picture the scenario when our President is now the chair of SADC. What would we expect as Zimbabweans, and what would SADC itself expect and see from him?
Ideologically, SADC is in safe hands by virtue of the coming in of His Excellency President Emmerson Mnangagwa as the chair. Why? because his leadership is anchored on that burden of history that gave life to Pan-Africanism, that ideological drive that gave life to the birth of SADC itself. So ideologically, the region is in safe hands because he's a tried and tested nationalist. Fast forward, let's come back home. He has created a reputable policy footprint in agriculture, in mining, in industry, and many other spheres of national development. So what SADC should anticipate is a progressive economic development virus that is going to permeate each inch of the region, ensuring that no place and no one is left behind as far as issues of human capital development are concerned, because he has left that footprint at home. In ensuring that innovation happens in each and every part of SADC, because under him, Zimbabwe has enjoyed Education 5.0. In ensuring that food security is going to be a permanent feature of the region's development, because back here at home, Zimbabwe has got Fumvudza as a result of him. Ensuring that there's going to be the full and profitable exploitation of our mineral resources, because right here in Zimbabwe, he achieved a $23 billion mining economy. And under His Excellency President Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, there will be an influx of external capital because of his flagship trust that we are all basking at courtesy of his Zimbabwe's Open for Business. So SADC is awaiting a lot of unprecedented development under the chairmanship of Zimbabwe, led by His Excellency President Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa.
That's Richard Mahomva, who is the Director of International Communications in the Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services. Richard has been telling us about what to expect at the SADC summit, and also having given that historical background to understand why our government has to go this far in preparing for this summit. So if you would like to get in touch with us about issues we're discussing here, or further information about what will be happening at the SADC summit, you can do so on the numbers that are showing on your screen. If you'd like to engage with us on the same issues, you can also do that on the social media platforms that again are showing on the screen. If you have missed some of the episodes of Economic Forum, you can actually watch them on our YouTube channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. So on behalf of Richard Runyararo Mahomva and the production crew, this is John Masugu wishing you happy viewing.